Get the idea? So that's what we're trying to do. And because we're approaching E minor, if you go and follow that cycle of fifths towards E minor, you might come up with something like this. So melody first, to the third, to the fourth of the scale, back to the third, and now we're getting into cycle of fifths where we can actually start to throw in more chords, which makes it sound more jazz. One of the things that I always try to do here on the Jazzmentl channel at YouTube is to give you very practical tips that you can use to make your piano playing sound a little bit more professional, or quite a bit more professional if that's what you're looking for. As a pro, I'm always concerned about, number one, making music. That's the most important thing. And if there was a secondary thing to making music, it's to make music as a jazz piano player. How do you make music that sounds jazz, but also is pleasing to the ear? And that's what we're going to be talking about in this video. I've picked out a fairly simple song. It's called What a Wonderful World. I think we all know the tune from Louis Armstrong, among other people who've made it popular. And the fact that it's simple doesn't mean that it should sound simple. It should sound jazz. There should be elements of the way that you play that tune that sound jazz to the ear. Just kind of bends the ear a little bit and makes the listener perk up and go, wow, what was that? What was that chord progression? And that's the process that I'm going to walk you through in this video. The challenge with YouTube videos is we have limited time together. So in approximately 10 to 15 minutes, I'm going to walk you through that process. So if you're thinking, how do I move from the current way that I play the piano to a more jazz approach, to sounding better, to all the things that I'm seeking, just sounds that are more pleasing to my ear. How do I actually do that? And I think the answer is masterclasses. You have to take lessons. It's not something that you can pick up in 10 minutes. I'll go through the process with you, but I'm pretty sure during that process, you're going to think to yourself, what is that chord voicing? How is he putting those things together? I'm going to give you the overview, and I think it's important to stick around to the end of this video because you're going to see the process that I go through when I'm learning a new tune and I'm trying to make it sound more jazz. In terms of the actual masterclasses, I'm going to put a link up here in the corner. You can go and register for those masterclasses. We haven't started yet. These would be for intermediate to advanced players. Just sign up. It's absolutely free to sign up. There's no obligation, and I will send you the details when we have them ready. Okay, let's get started in how we approach a jazz standard and turn it into something that sounds like a great jazz pianist, a professional. The first thing is, I'm thinking melody. So we all know the tune. It's actually a really simple tune. It's almost like Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. The thing that makes it interesting is most of the melody notes are chord tones, the third of the chord, which makes it a 10th. So if you actually look at the chord progression, the interesting thing about all of that is that those are 10ths, except for the very first note, which is the root of the chord, G. So we're in the key of G, and just follow the third chord tones through the chord progression. So 1, and then go to the third of B, which is the third of the scale. So this is the root, 10th. And even there, it's a third. Okay, so just follow that. None of this sounds jazz yet, but that's the first step. Figure out what the melody is and the basic chord structure. So the chord structure is 1, 2, 3, to 4. So 4, 3, 2, 1. And then 5 of 6. So B, which is the third of the scale, to 6. 6 minor, and then flat 6. That's the one that kind of comes out of nowhere, but it's a really nice sound. And then just 2, 5, 1 of G. And then 3, 6, 2, 5. Back to the top. So that's step 1. Melody, simple chord structure. And again, none of it sounds jazz. How do you make it sound more like jazz? And this is where the second step to this process comes in. Once you figure out the basic chord structure, then you need to move to more complex chords based on what we call destination chords. So if I'm thinking about that in terms of a phrase, the end of the phrase is E minor. How do we get to E minor? And the first thought that ever comes into my mind when I'm approaching a destination chord is what chord structure can I put in front of that that follows what we call cycle of fifths, diatonic cycle of fifths. In the key of G, diatonic cycle of fifths is every fifth down in the chord progression. So if we started on G, then a fifth down from that would be C, fifth down from that is F sharp, fifth down from that is B, fifth down is E, then A, then D, then G. So it just follows the cycle of fifths. Get the idea? So that's what we're trying to do. And because we're approaching E minor, if you go and follow that cycle of fifths towards E minor, you might come up with something like this. So melody first, to the third, to the fourth of the scale, back to the third, and now we're getting into cycle of fifths where we can actually start to throw in more chords, which makes it sound more jazz. So that whole thing was cycle of fifths. One more time. So we're doing cycle of fifths starting on B. So B, E, A, D, G, C, F sharp, B, to E. Right? This whole cycle of fifths thing. And you could play a million chords on that. And the goal is to keep the melody going using that specific cycle of fifths chord progression. So one more time. Then we go to flat 6. Now the interesting thing about that chord is because it comes out of nowhere and it's not part of the diatonic scale. Diatonic scale being G. Where is E flat in that diatonic scale? Flat 6, it's not in there. So make a big deal out of it. And it's best to play it like fourths. So if you think about fourths, anything that you use in there will sound jazz. And I'm talking about voicing in fourths. So E flat, this is the melody note, the third of the scale. Again, another 10th. Think about using that note in conjunction with fourths. So when you hit that note, think about fourths and maybe doing some arpeggiating or whatever, but just kind of land there. Again, we're trying to make music. That's the most important thing. And what's pleasing to the ear is some pianistic things that you can do to embellish the actual note. It just kind of hangs there. And if all you do is hang there and do nothing, it's going to sound silly. For example, we just did this whole cycle of fifths. you do this, I don't know, it's not very pleasing. It's definitely not pianistic. Do something like this. And then get to 2. And just before we go any further in this video, I would like to ask you to reach down and hit the little thumbs up button. Of course, if you find the video helpful. If you find it helpful, a thumbs up really helps the channel, definitely helps us out here at Jazzmentl, and we can reach a larger audience and help those musicians too. If you'd like to subscribe to our channel, we'd absolutely love to have you. We deal with mostly intermediate and advanced people, but we also have beginner courses as well. All you have to do is hit the subscribe button and maybe the little bell, and we'll notify you of all the upcoming courses that we're making. Now, what do we do next? We haven't really talked about the bridge yet, and I want to leave that just for a moment. We're still in the A section, so it's like an AABA tune. We have to repeat that again. So when we repeat it, we might want to do something different. Every time you play a jazz standard, you shouldn't play the same thing twice in an A section. Even though the melody is the same, you want to do different chords or different types of chords. So the next step would be different types of chords. Think about that cycle of fifths that we did and put in more rich chords. Think about upper structure notes, flat 9s, flat 13s, sharp 11s, things that make it more dissonant. That's where the whole dissonance resolve comes in. Make something dissonant, then resolve it to simple chords. It's very pleasing to the ear to do that. Now, if you just hung out on dissonance and you didn't resolve that, it sounds silly. But if you're going 5 to 1, or that's D to G. Right? It's all about creating dissonance and then resolving it. So when you think about the chord progression, think about that cycle of fifths and put in more rich chords, more upper structure notes that are a little bit more dissonant, so that when you eventually get to that E minor chord, it's so pleasing. You just pull back from dissonance and get into that simple chord structure. So let's try that. Now, there's a million different ways that could have done that. That's the way that came out. So if you're going back and doing the A section again, you might do something like this. Again, we're pulling a little bit chords out of the hat. That's where instruction comes in. That's where master classes and private and group instruction can really help you. And again, I put a link to our master classes that are coming up really soon. I really love to work with you on this, but if you have questions about exactly what I did there, those master classes are the time to get the answer. I can't really explain in a 10-minute video exactly what I did there. I could do it if I had an hour. Just that one chord progression and different ways to approach that chord progression and the exact chord voicings that you would play. Right, so that's the next step. So then the final step to that would be, as soon as you figure out a decent, dissonant, resolved chord progression, Then what you want to do is start thinking about inner voices. Inner voices are movement once you plunk down a chord that move before you change the chord. For example, even on the original note. Did you hear that? I resolved a simple beginning chord. While most people would do this, I'm doing this. I'm resolving 2 to the third of the chord. Hear the inner voices? I'm just going to recap to this point. The first thing is the melody and the chord progression that are simple. Once you have that on your fingers, then go for more destination chords and figure out how you can put 2/5 progressions or cycle of fifths in front of that. And then when you hit chords like E flat, make a bigger deal out of them, especially since they lay there a while. And then once you do that, then think about more complex dissonant chords and the concept of resolve. And then once you have that, focus on the inner voices. Don't just play block chords. Focus on the movement of the voices, getting to chord tones, things that sound nice. Once you have the inner voices done and you've worked over the A section a couple of different ways, you've played different chord progressions and different types of chords, you've created some dissonance. Once you've done all that with the A section, repeat it with the B section, just do something a little bit different. And then when you get into the bridge and you get pedal notes like this, so the pedal note is D. We're focused on the fifth of the chord. And you could make it more complicated by putting like force against the melody, like this. Now all I did was put a tritone substitution in for D, which is A flat, and then a 2/5 leading to E minor. Once you have the basic chord structure of the bridge, then work that over a little bit with inner voices. Just keep going with the whole thought of cycle of fifths. Where can I put 2 5s or cycle of fifths in front of a destination chord? So in terms of the bridge, there was a couple of things that I did there that you might have questions about. Please put them in the comments below. If you're looking for specific examples of chord progressions or different types of voicings for those chord progressions, you can also ask those questions in the comments below. If you have other ideas or your own approach to playing a jazz standard and learning it for the first time and creating chord progressions and finding your way to destination chords, I'd love to also hear about that in the comments below. And if you have an example of that, please put a link to that example. I'd love to see that video. Okay, like I mentioned before, it's important that you understand we cannot tackle the whole gamut of what you would need to learn as a jazz piano player to reach that level. That's something that's going to require individual or group instruction. So I do have some master classes coming up. That's a situation where you can play for me. I'll listen to it, give you some feedback, but also I'll talk about the specific chord progressions, specific chord voicings that we use. If there was a next step in this process, it would be to get to the soloing stage on the tune What a Wonderful World, which would mean something like this. All of which follows the chord progressions that we originally had for the tune. And again, that's a whole other level. Also, we're going to deal with those things in our master classes. If you want to sign up to be notified when those master classes are coming up and all of the details, again, I'm going to put a link up here in the corner. You can go check that out. It's absolutely free to sign up. You are under no obligation to pay any money or do anything with me yet. I haven't even decided exactly how the format's going to go, but I'm working real hard at getting to that point. I hope you enjoyed this instruction on how to approach a jazz standard as a solo piano player and as a jazz player. I trust that it was helpful to you. Again, any comments that you have, please put them below. And if you're looking for more information or specific information on maybe how to approach a ballad with specific chord voicings, I've actually written out some of those chord voicings. You can go check that video out right here.